Hello, my name is Joesph Green. I'm a community activist here at 777 Community Warehouse located in San Bernardino, California. 777 Community Warehouse provides services for disadvantaged people. We have services for re-entry programs for people who just been released from prison. We also have food, clothing, and we help those that are homeless. We have educational enlightenment programs, and tonight we have a special evening with Dr. Bailey. Now, Dr. Joesph A. Bailey was a practicing physician here in San Bernardino for over 40 years. His practices cover orthopedic surgeon, orthopedic medicine, and orthopedic genetics. Dr. Bailey has been retired for 20 years now, and now he's devoted his time and his efforts to helping struggling Black people. He also helps the youth, and he has coordinated programs for young Black males. He also writes for the local Black newspaper, blackvoicenews.com. He has 3 articles every week regarding ancient African principles, Black history, and African American slave history. Doctor has 35 books, 5 dictionaries, and he has vast knowledge. And we would like you to visit his website at www.jabailey.md.com. Thank you for coming out tonight, and here's your program.
3,500 years ago, the Chinese warrior Sun Tzu, S-U-N-T-Z-U, said, knowing the opponent's tendencies and momentum, it becomes simple to lure them, take them, or prepare against them. This evening we're going to talk about Europeans. My idea of Europeans is not so much a race or a color as it is a philosophy. I divide members of that group into 3 categories. 40% are Satanists. This means that they are directly opposed to anything related to God. They believe in the power of evil. 50% are followers. Whereas the Satanists are evil and dangerous and will never change, the followers are ignorant and dangerous, and they may become more tolerant. The third are 10% humane Europeans who are nice but ignorant and can be misleading. They may incompletely change. What all 3 of these groups share in common is that of a material world orientation. That they think they know what is best for everybody, even about things of which they have no knowledge. Third, they all benefit from keeping Black people down. Fourth, they are not about to share their power. Fifth, they are friendly, but never your friend, often trying to find out what you know about that will benefit them and what is needed to keep you down.
The following information and any of the presentations by Dr. Bailey are all copyrighted under his name. I'm going to begin with the primitive European origins. In the middle of a week-long attempt to discover the beginnings of Europeans, I was ready to accept the quote, "The more you don't know about us, the better off we are," which came from Sharon Bingaman. At the end of that week, there was the pervading idea that much of Europe and Western Asia, from as far back as 130,000 BC, was inhabited by the Neanderthals or Neanderthals, who existed in Europe as late as 30,000 BC. They were replaced by anatomically modern humans the Cro-Magnoid Homo sapiens, who began to appear in Europe circa 45,000 years ago. Given that the two hominid species likely coexisted in Europe, anthropologists wondered whether the two interacted. Nevertheless, through concepts in Europe, anthropologists said the following are undergoing steady change. The best information available to me is that the earliest known migrations out of Africa were to the north and east into India, the Far East, the Near East, and the South Pacific. Around 125,000 BC, a group of Africans moved northward towards the Nile and into the Levant, which is bordering the Mediterranean between Egypt and Turkey. Another, circa 90,000 BC, across short sketches or major points of sea along Asia's southern coast. Then they migrated into East Asia. Then the Dravidians of South India, Pakistan, and Iran. Then, circa 85,000 BC, a group crossed the entrance of the Red Sea in the south and into the Arabian Peninsula to reach the Indian subcontinent, spreading to Indonesia and reaching southern China by 75,000 BC. Then by 65,000 BC, they had spread to Borneo, Australia, India, throughout Asia, Scandinavia, and close to the North Pole. Then 45,000 BC into Europe, 30,000 BC, 3 separate migrations crossed the Bering Land Bridge into Alaska and on into North America by 25,000 BC. Some of these migrations were by land, sea, and settlements gradually moving outward.
Los Angeles Times in 2001, May 28th, gave this map and showing the migrations of Africans to all parts of the world outside of Africa.
Europeans' beginnings were a complicated demographic which included many successive periods of population growth, but initially and mainly Africans. These Paleolithic populations created sophisticated inventions and left evidence of their advanced culture in the cave paintings of southern France, dating to at least 30,000 BC. Geneticists say northern Europe was populated by the migration of a very small number of modern humans who left the center of the Great Lakes of eastern Africa about 50,000 years ago. These Grimaldi Negroids moved up through northern Africa into Europe to become, many believe, the Aurignacian foundations, circa 45,000 BC, of the various European races. Of greater importance is they brought with them their more advanced and inventive culture, things which ensured their survival: rafts, crude clothing, stone tools, weapons, and traps, the wheel, pottery, the marked stick for measuring, and ways of making fire. Over the next 20,000 years, they transformed into white people, such as Aryans, Alpine and Slavics, such as Scandinavians, Germans, and southern Russians, who lived in the region of the Baltic Sea, encountering fierce weather in the Eurasian steppes, vast treeless grasslands from the icy cold in winter. The barrenness of these regions and the lack of riches within the soil all fashioned a setting of the necessity for basic survival and striving for security.
The way migrations occurred at that time was not just going by foot to a location. Sometimes it would be, most of the time it would be going about 10 miles from the camp where they were and setting up another camp. And over a period of hundreds of years, they would then have progressed thousands of miles into new areas. And that's what took so long for the the Africans that left Africa to get into Northern Europe.
The Ice Age environment ensured the land was minimally productive of food and other essentials required for survival. The resultant scarcity of essentials dictated that individuals and their nomadic tribes rob and kill neighbors to acquire what they needed to live.
Okay, this is fundamental. The land was so harsh that they would kill anybody, family members, mothers, anybody, in order to survive. This is what set their minds to a way that we see today.
Scarcity implies insufficient resources to supply everyone's needs and wants, and the reaction to that is first rapacious, the robber instinct of I'll get there first and take it all. Second, covetous, I'll want yours so I'll have some extra. Third, defensive, using any means necessary to keep what one has and prevent others from having any. By these Eurasians also lacking other environmental advantages of necessities for life made it easy to develop a second nature mindset of scarcity.
These three things that she just mentioned are exactly what you see today. This is why history is today. If you understand how things develop, human nature, once it's formed, doesn't change. It may be modified, but it doesn't change. So this is who you're dealing with.
Those second nature experiences produced imprints or impressions, said Plato, on the mind's wax called memory traces or engrams. That is the seed of the scarcity tree concept. Realistic scarcity initially led to survival by any means necessary because the world was viewed as hostile to them.
Now, an engram is, imagine that it just snowed and very deep snow, and for the first time you walk into that snow. You're making footprints in that snow. The same thing happens in the mind, that you're making imprints which are impressions that last, and you can't erase that. And Europeans' initial way of approaching life, which founded their philosophy of life, was these things that have just been mentioned. And this has not changed. They still have this same concept. If you understand that, you will then also understand why they may be friendly, but they'll never be your friend.
This next section has to do with fear-based mindsets of early Europeans. Unlike the just, those sufficiently delusional to believe they are superior fear everything. European mental health literature agrees fear is their most common emotion.
There's a mechanism that people use, in particular Europeans, it's called projection. Projection is what you are inside that you put on other people. For example, Europeans are very prone to talk about the angry black man. But there has never been a race of people that was more emotional than Europeans. Theirs is in the realm of fear. They fear everything.
And that fear is painful, and that from their mindset beginnings, fear has been its superstar legend symbol. Medically, fear naturally and automatically activates one's ancient brain for a fight or flight response as, 1, a birth gift to preserve one from evil. Here, fear is not to overbear reason, but rather to assist it. When fear's origination is from a world perceived as dangerous, 2, worry fears continue to expand while producing increasing doubt, distrust, worry, and fatigue.
Okay, the brain, this is a model, is like 3 scoops of ice cream. The top scoop is the reasoning brain. The middle scoop is the emotional brain. The bottom scoop, which is down here, is it's called the ancient brain. Some people call it the reptilian brain. We can call it the emergency brain. It is down in here where true fight or flight activities take place. And those are powered by rage and anger and pain. So when we're talking about legitimate fear, we're talking what comes out of here. But Europeans use fear to their advantage. And they make a lot of money off of faking fear. And that comes from this part of their brain. So keep in mind that there are 2 separate kinds of things going on here. True fear, but the majority of their fear is for their advantage.
To harbor fear means it percolates throughout all one's thinking and shapes one's interpretations about certain happenings, thus leading to failures and despair. At its start, one's mind is a slave to hypersensitive delusional ghosts who chronically tyrannize within one's imagination, raise phantoms of horror, and beset life with supernumerary distresses.
Now you see this all the time on TV. If you just scan the channels, you'll see ghosts and witches and all of this other weird stuff. This is a reflection of them thinking this way about in a fearful manner. It is a way of life.
Sufficient fears or cumulative small ones cloud one's vision, make one desperate, and produce cruelty to oneself and or to others. No passion so effectively robs the mind of the power of its acting reasonably and kindly as does fear. In the meantime...
Excuse me.
Oh, sure.
This is why you need to understand what's going on and develop self-protective mechanisms before you get into the situation. Because if you just wait until it happens, then you're overwhelmed by the fear and you can't think clearly as to what to do. A lot of bad decisions are made from lack of preparation for situations that are fear-producing.
In the meantime, worry fear causes the victim to die 1,000 deaths. However, number 3, brute fears are purposely generated, grow in darkness, and then stimulated, orchestrates the most drastic and presumably most effective remedy it knows, that is, direct actions.
This is how the Tulsa, Oklahoma riots began. They made up something, and they presented it as something that everybody, all the white people should be afraid of. And so you need to come out and fight right now and burn the city down and kill all the people. This is repeatedly happening every day. The police use it every day.
Chronic brute fear actions follow the progression from indifference to hate to evilness to sadism, the IHES complex.
Okay. This state of indifference is a new state for black people. Black people have never been indifferent to other black people. But in following the model of Europeans, which started in the 1970s, we have begun to become indifferent to other black people. This puts us on the road to hate, to evil, and then to doing terrible acts just for pleasure. I saw one thing on TV not long ago about this black fellow that the first time he said he shot and killed somebody, he said, "I wanted more." That's what happens when you get in that kind of mindset. And if you don't protect yourself by not getting in that mindset, you are on the path for that to happen.
Typically, fear follows crime as its punishment. Since appearing on Earth, Europeans have been and remain a warring people. Of course, war generates fear in the predators and the prey. Brute Europeans developed the concept of delusional fears, consisting of self-generated unreal dangers or even threats as part of an addiction to fear, an addiction serving for the justification to kill, take, destroy for personal gain, an element of their dark side in both their inner and outer worlds. 4, Satanists use fear for excitement.
This country is very hypocritical, calling itself a democracy. It has never been a democracy. Greece was never a democracy. The only true democracy in the history of mankind was in Africa. There have been 67 wars in this country in the last 50 years. I think it's now 70. 70 wars within 50 years in this country. Think about that. You have to have a certain kind of mindset to do that. And what kind of mindset is it? Think about that. Is this something that you want to identify with? You have an option to learn about your brilliant ancient African ancestors and what their approach was, which is entirely different from what we're talking about right now.
During the Ice Age in Northern Europe, fear was properly associated with survival, type 1 fear. After basic survival was no longer an issue, it was replaced with a brute, greedy mindset, a mindset consisting of a glob of reality, plus distortion, plus fantasy, plus a mindset using fear as a weapon to stimulate aggression so as to gain power and control over others, as well as to kill, take, destroy as a means of entertainment.
Okay, the Europeans came on Earth about 45,000 BC. This was during the Ice Age. The Ice Age ended around 12,500 BC. When that began to happen, there was not the problem of scarcity anymore. However, they had developed a mindset, a second nature of killing, taking, and destroying. And it was a way of having fun or pleasure. I mean, and even Europeans write about how they would just maybe eating dinner and just start stabbing each other. I mean, it's just crazy. They just want to fight. And this hasn't changed.
Because those gains are never enough, greed is the driving force to keep getting or trying to get more than enough. Hence, destructive means are created enhanced, or maintained for illusional self-protection, and this automatically generates type 2, a fear of retaliation from their victims.
The slave owners' families were so afraid of rebellions against the slaves that they had bars on their windows and guns and everything. But that fear was not great enough to cause them to not do evil. In other words, the whole idea of what can I gain in these illegal things overrides the power of fear.
That is why they keep a foot on victims' throats until they have erased the victim's spirit to retaliate.
In slavery, the cruelty was so great and so continuous every day that it just wiped out black people's spirit, and with their spirit, it took away their courage. And we are seeing the after effects of that right now, that we lack the courage to stand up for what we deserve to have. I ask you to examine this to see if that's how you want to live. Or do you want to return to your birth state where you were born with courage and to fight for what you believe is right, what you know to be right? Now you see this in Africa right now following apartheid. Every time Europeans go into anything, and I saw this clearly in the Philippines when I was stationed there, they so destroy the culture, every aspect of the culture, and they take everything that culture has and then leave. And when they leave, the people are fighting each other. And we are like that now. We are fighting each other instead of coming together. Think about these things. Is this the way you want to live your life?
Type 3 is self-created fear. It is self-protection stemming from all ill-gotten gains and resultant worry about victims reclaiming it. Type 4.
They're afraid that we are going to go back and get what we deserve. Reparations, for example. Great fear.
Type 4, fear for justification, was and is deliberately created to serve to justify attacks, mainly on colored peoples, so as to gain more unjust possessions.
And we know about that. In the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina, there were the white people left the slaves in 1850, and the slaves that were left managed somehow to make a living on these islands. And then about 10 years ago, Europeans saw that they liked these islands. They moved in, they raised the rent to about $40,000 a year, so that all the black people couldn't pay that. I mean, they just didn't make that kind of money. And they took over the islands, bulldozed down all the graves, all the Amerindians and black people's graves, and built golf courses and other luxury kinds of things. This is an example of type 4. They invented some kind of excuse that black people were going to do this or that, which wasn't true.
Type 5, white superiority fears, are from insecurity, unsafeness, unsureness, and instability. Examples: fears of losing jobs, status, or intellectual positions to black people, whom they greatly envy.
We don't realize how great we are and how dependent the world is on what we do. I mean, even though they've beaten the street youth down to terrible depths, what the street youth do is popular all over the world. I mean, just think about that. Think about it. We have so much creativity. We have so much that is enviable by other peoples of the world that they don't want to let us go. And you can see, if you know anything about history, after Reconstruction, black people wanted to move out of the South. White people did all kinds of things to stop them from going because they didn't want them to leave. Realize your power. Use that power.
They seek isolation from victims in order to avoid power dilutions by those they try to keep down. Examples include housing or school integration causing white flight. Type 6 Europeans' intercompetition fear includes not being able to keep up with the Joneses. Type 6 that is, trying to match the lifestyle of one's more affluent neighbors or acquaintances. Type 7, fear of not winning fairly against victim competitors or in self-created competitions called among the richest Europeans the game of he who has the most adult toys not only survives but wins.
Now there was a guy that went somewhere and he said he had $1 billion and he was saying, I got to make another billion. And so, you know, even if he did nothing but spend money, he couldn't do it. So why is it that they want to get more money? It's not about the money, it's about the power and the status and the ability to win in their competitive game.
Despite lacking actual physical danger, there are a host of fears and associated reactions to imagined threats to one's self-esteem. Type 8 is a fear of exposure for not being the superior individuals they claim themselves to be.
When you look at what black people have been allowed to get into following slavery, starting with Jack Johnson, he had to pursue this white guy around the world in order and embarrass him to get a fight. And he beat him bad when he fought. And then Jesse Owens, you know, he won he beat the master race, the Germans. And as you see coming into baseball, when the doors were open for baseball, there were just a flood of black talent that were leading every part of the statistics. The same as in football. Look at the percentage of the black players on football teams. There's two main black women in tennis, and Serena is at the top of the list. There's one black guy in golf, and he's at the top of the list. This is what happens, and so naturally they are afraid of competing with black males. That's why they got to keep black males down. They don't mind black males entertaining them, but they don't want to open up the potential for all of these brilliant ancient African genes to start flowering. We've got to start getting these boys away from the idea of they all want to grow up to be professional athletes. Rarely is that their talent. You know, we're sitting on just genius that can change the world overnight. And that's what we need to be encouraging in our children.
Type 9 is fear of being subordinated, that is, being overshadowed by another's power, especially if that is from one or more black people. Type 10, Satanists only fear loss of their ill-gotten gains, for they believe evilness is right.
Africans believe in a spiritual realm and in metaphysical realms. The metaphysical realms include include the sublime, which is a transition between the spiritual and the metaphysical, and the astral world, which is a big world. And it is where you have a form of heaven and a form of purgatory. Black people do not have, or ancient Africans never had any concept of a hell. This is a European invention. Africans used a made-up realm which they call the supernatural. They used the supernatural to explain things of the spiritual and the metaphysical. Now, as long as those concepts, and they were stories, and they could be made up stories, and they could be all kind of fancy stories, but they had to stay within the confines of the four spiritual elements: unconditional love, truth, reality, and the natural. They could not step outside any of those boundaries, because then it would not conform to their idea of the supernatural. By contrast, Europeans don't believe in the spiritual, and they don't believe in the metaphysical. They believe in the physical and their made-up concept of the supernatural. This is extremely important to understand. So they have gone on and invented all kinds of people in their supernatural world. Satan is one of them. Hell is another one, and another god, which I won't talk about. Now, you need to keep that distinction, because they have used the gods they made in their supernatural realm and brought them over and said that these are compatible with the African God, the one universal high God, and it is not. But most black people have believed that nonsense, and to their detriment. That's one of the things that keeps us down. That one belief alone keeps us down.
This is a European supernatural-based metaphysical.
We tend to believe anything Europeans say. If you knew how they came up with the stuff that they tell you is the truth, the stuff that they tell you is the Word of God, it would make you throw up. It's just that bad. So I'm going to give you an example now of how they went about dealing with one topic. But this topic applies to everything that you believe that Europeans say is the truth.
While at a private lunch recently with a university president, once a college professor, I asked him if he had ever seen a European discussion about any non-mechanical subject that dealt with the what it is or essence of the subject.
There are three parts to anything that's significant. The first part is, what is it? And the what is it is what it was when it came into existence. The second thing is, what does it do? The third thing is, how does it appear? Europeans never talk about what something is. Never. Africans specialize in what something is. It's only when you deal with what something is, do you have certainty, do you have knowledge. Anything else is information, and information is wrong.
This lends support to my research indicating European metaphysics is based simply on various so-called scholars' individual opinions, and that collectively forms their concept of metaphysics and the supernatural's what it is. Hence, so much confusion pertains to the Europeans' word metaphysics and its contents that there can be no sense of what is right. But if such flaws are all one has ever been taught or heard or read, then one accepts it as the truth.
And this is what has happened to us. We have never been told the truth. You can't find ancient African information philosophy anywhere. You can't find it. They won't even accept my books in the library of a local university. You just can't find it. And so when people want to argue with me about this or that, they said, well, I'm going to go and look it up. And my first question is, where are you going to look? You know, you can find something written by Europeans, but I stopped using European information, all of it in the 1980s. And it wasn't until then that I started progressing.
To illustrate how the wrong ramifications of such flawed information, in contrast to knowledge, which is certain, came about, let us consider how Europeans put the subject of metaphysics together. Today's European historians promote the greatness of Aristotle, and yet never mention his best ideas or writings were of African origin. Nevertheless, preservation of his works meant secretly hiding them in different places with many suffering worm-eaten maltreatment, plus misinterpretation of passages by copyists, plus misarranged into helter-skelter order. His today's books were never edited or authored by him.
That's fundamental to the information you receive today by somebody who says that they are famous in history. It's not their work. Go ahead.
The work called Metaphysics, for instance, he wrote as bits and pieces on various subjects. As with the European Bible, when others edited them, they added expressions, selected what they thought was worthwhile, ignored the chronological order of the treatises, grouped dissertations from different periods under the same title, and presented this as a systematized whole to the public, called metaphysics, meaning the tract that is to be read after the physics. Hence how Aristotle's works lack unity or any clear progression of thought, are repetitious, and are at times even contradictory.
Now, we'll skip over the next part. It's just talking about how other people had different definitions that had nothing to do with this. So that when you look in a dictionary or when you look in a reference book, you don't know what you're going to get. I'll close right now by saying that some of the things I look for to determine who is European oriented. If their conversation is about money, if they start off talking about money, I'm immediately turned off. If they are excited about technology, I'm immediately turned off. They will interrupt the point you're trying to make by saying what they think is important. Many of them have an attitude problem. Now, those that I will consider, one, they will listen to the end of what I have to say without interrupting me. They may write down things if they want to ask questions. The second thing is they speak of what we can do to improve somebody or something. A third thing is they are creative in relating what they heard you say with the latest that is available. These are people that I pay attention to. I don't discard the first group, but but they have a long way to come from. They've dug themselves into a hole.